My name is Iracia Pearl Telefero. I live in Ojai, California, and I live on Oak Grove people and Chumash land. And what I believe in is less is more. Parents taught me that less is more. So the causes that I have gotten involved in are to give voice to people that don't have a voice or people that don't use their voice and feel some kind of way. I've never really been a person to sit back, so I think I'm a good person for this. And the two groups of people that I mostly try to give voice for are Black children and prisoners. So I am a naturalist or a facilitator, and often I find myself in large groups of children, and mostly the children are white. And there'll be a sprinkling of other children, usually two or three Black children. An example I'm going to give you is I was on Catalina Island. There were 150 children, and three of the children were Black. So all night, people kept getting up talking about it was dark and evil and the darkness. And every time they said something dark or referred to dark and evil, I could see these children's posture start like this. And by the end of the night, they started shrinking almost, and they became like this. And so I asked those children, are you being affected because of the use of the word dark always being negative? And all three of those children said yes. They said they were always in a situation where white is good and bad is Black. So I would like to start a conscious effort to get people to understand that people that are dark skinned, especially children, are affected by this, by people always saying it was so dark and evil. And we're trying to get to the light. Well, everything started in darkness and everything ends in darkness. And the light comes from darkness. So this isn't something that is bad. And I tried to explain to a lot of little Black children that feel this way when they're sitting in the classroom or sitting with other children. Um, the other group of people that I like to speak up for are prisoners. And I've been going into the prison with a job that I've had now for about 6 or 7 years. When I go into the prison, the I notice that most of the prisoners are dark skinned. So usually I'm sitting in a group of mostly African American, Hispanic. Every now and then there's a white person there or an Asian. And they all feel so separate and so alone. And when you sit in listening and talking circles, mostly they're listening. But when you sit in these circles, after a while, you realize, or they realize, that they're in these big prisons. Everybody thinks they're alone, and everybody thinks their experience is their own, and they don't realize that they've had these experiences with other people have had the same experiences. I'll give you an example. We had gone around the room and we were talking about a safe place. And it got three-quarters of around the room, and a young white man started crying. And he said he was an Aryan. And he said that he didn't realize that his story was the same as everybody else's story in there. He said that if he hadn't have been taught to hate, that he wouldn't be in the situation that he was in right now. And so for him to be in a listening circle and have to listen to other people's stories and they be the same as him really connected the whole group together. And this has spread throughout the prison. Once everybody sees that they are really the same, the only difference is that their skin color might be different, but they've all gone through the same experiences. And time after again, after sitting in these circles, I hear the men say that they feel like a person now. They feel their human side and they don't feel like a number so much anymore. So I am really happy to be in this position that I get to speak up for those people that don't get a chance to speak out for themselves. So that's what one of the things I'm doing with my life. Thank you.
And I'm on the land called Gianyar in Bali, Indonesia. I believe in the syntropic nature of our human family, which is one of collaboration, love, and the capacity to create prosperity together with nature. A story of a time when I felt moved and compelled to act on behalf of my community was probably about 10, 11 years ago in my local district in far north Queensland, Australia, where I was living. I was a young father, and we were living a very happy and simple life. And I had a little community hub in our village market center where I was screening movies. We had a transition towns movement, so we were about seed saving and bartering and exchanging and really just getting the fabric of community to feel alive. It was called Recharge Kuranda, and it was part of a community-supported agricultural network that I was running at the time. So I had a lot of connections all across what is called the Tablelands region there, with farmers and other community groups and circles, and I was very well interwoven. And then it was brought to my attention that our local council was having the idea, because they like it to kind of be busy with stuff and make more bylaws and create more things, because you have to justify the existence of a council and the expenditure outside of what's really necessary. And so they came up with the idea that if they could get enough state funding, that they would purchase enough fluoride to add that to the water supply, which is what the water supply in our municipality and the entire region didn't have at that time, except for individuated townships. And I was born and raised in a place called the Netherlands. And so for me, that notion of adding fluoride to public drinking water was very well understood to be knocked out of the water back in the 70s. And for me, as a young father, I felt that I was in an interesting position with my far-spreading networks across the tablelands. And so I was approached by some of the community members to see if I could do something about this. And I was like, well, that's obviously not about me. And so it became really about us. And there were some factions in our Kuranda community that were all against this whole notion of fluoride. And so they started the groups and their meetings, and I attended some, and I just got to, I don't really feel that that's going to be my, where I draw my juice from, the wellspring that I operate from. And so I suggested that we would go for something a little bit more all-embracing. And so I coined our movement, the Fluoride-Free Kuranda initiative, and to ask our community to envision what it is to simply remain free. We're already free. Everybody was acting as if it was already done, and if we were getting done over by the government all over again, and we were being betrayed. And so there was a lot of anger in the community with those that were still carrying a lot of unresolved trauma with the system. And so I was able to mediate between groups and different factions in our community to create a bridging fabric. And I was meeting with the counselors to ask them about their reasoning and what their justifications were, and really what their own research has really done them in service to making these decisions. And I also studied law And as I made myself available to the community, many people started funneling into the email accounts and contacts that I made available. And I got great support in the legal sense of the word, and was able to draft together with some anonymous people that wanted to stay anonymous, some great legal framework to present to our local members of parliament. And one thing that, because of my organization that I was really operating for, which was called Parapachimama Spirit of Earth, I was doing a lot of work with indigenous communities, and I had it very clear as a message from within that without the ceremonial grounding of all of this story that we create about not wanting this substance in our water, that I require to seek out counsel with the local spiritual elders. And I did that. I organized a circle in which I invited them to take all of our white men's dreaming and to marry that with their indigenous understanding of time and place. And from that prayer and those incantations that they supported and welcomed and really embraced all of our dreaming with, my legal framework went to Parliament, and it altered the Fluoridation Act of 2008 in the state legislation, which gave freedom of choice to all councils to choose if they want to implement or not, as opposed to it being mandated on a federal and state level. And so that's my story, how the combinations of our Western mind streaming and the indigenous mind combined can create beautiful coherence in outcomes that serve the well-being of communities.
My name is Angelina Cook, and I live in McLeod primarily. It's at the southern base of Mount Shasta, which is the second to southernmost volcano in the Cascade Ring of Fire in far northern California. I live in Winnemem-Wintu ancestral tribal territory. McLeod is the Winnemem-Wintu are the Middle River people. And I've been a fortunate resident in this watershed for about 15 years. I believe in the power of participatory democracy and the ability of communities to restore right relation with the watersheds that sustain us. Before I jump into my story, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank a few sisters and colleagues who I invited to join us today. Kate Corbell and Kate York from Mount Shasta, and Lori Kaplan from Ashland, Oregon. Thank you so much for joining us today. So a time I felt moved to act on behalf of the greater good was when I moved to Mount Shasta in 2005 and learned that Nestle was building the world's largest water bottling factory in the small town of McLeod. And I was aware that McLeod, Mount Shasta, Dunsmuir, Weed, all the towns that are at the base of Mount Shasta, we're retired timber towns. And so we have a legacy of pretty extreme extractive resource management. And so when I moved here and saw that the water industry was starting to treat our aquifers and rivers like we did our forest for the prior 100 years, I got really concerned and thought it was a very bad idea. And so I started organizing and doing what I could to learn about source water protection and California water management. And it's pretty much taken 15 years for me to understand just how convoluted our water policies and regulations are. But no matter how corrupt and convoluted our politics and policies are, I think our much greater challenge to reclaiming right relationship with our watersheds is that how much we've been underestimating the perverse incentives of the profit motive. It seems like we've been allowing the profit motive to manage, pretty much dictate our natural resource management for 100 years. And now we're dealing with extreme catastrophic wildfire, extreme drought, uh, extremely smoky skies, like public health crises that make, I'm sorry, the coronavirus pandemic look like small potatoes. Um, when and if this water drought continues, like it looks like it's going to, water shortages will make us miss the days when our emergency rooms were overcrowded with um, sick people. So it's kind of been, the last 15 years has been one rude awakening after the next. I was taught to believe that American democracy worked for the people, by the people. And at so many levels, I have discovered the opposite, that our government works for private interests by a very small minority. And I'm someone who likes to try to work within my sphere of influence. And because I'm closer to the peasantry than I am to the pageantry, I I try to take responsibility for my role in the the ways we take water for granted, the ways we underestimate the value of ecosystem services, and the ways we've allowed democracy to become eroded because of this kind of more passive aggressive approach to democracy. It seems like one of our primary modes for environmental protection is through litigation. It's very expensive, and it generally, the judicial system, it works for the higher class. Like it, the laws do not, they're not written on behalf of the common people or the greater good. So the way I personally have evolved in my effort to change that story um, of is by running for supervisor for Siskiyou County and becoming way more active on the local governmental level. I think politicians get a really bad rap. And I think local government is one of the most important public servant sectors that anybody can go into, because right now we don't have good people making good decisions. Um, so yeah, it's a long story, but I'm committed, and I'm very grateful for the many ways in which people occupy their niche and come together to make community grassroots government possible.